OldGuyTalks.com is all about being a better man. Join me on this kick-ass journey. Exclusive stuff for members only in the Old Guy Cave. Opt in now. This is information only. Consult with an appropriate professional before starting any program. Do not be stupid. You are responsible for your own shit. The Old Guy is a capitalist and not a socialist weasel. He will be promoting stuff here and may be compensated. You can rest assured the Old Guy only promotes stuff he uses. You may have different results.
So this is Oris the Old Guy from www.oldguytalks.com. Today talking with Dr. Dom D'Agostino, and I am privileged, and I mean privileged to be speaking with Dom today. Dom is a assistant professor at the University of South Florida College of Medicine, Department of Microbiology, Molecular Microbiology, and Physiology, and that is a mouthful to say. So Dom is a leading expert on ketogenic diets and exogenous ketones. And by exogenous, I mean that you can go to your Amazon account, order them, and have them delivered to your door the next day if you have a Prime account. So that's what exogenous means. Dom's done a TED Talk. He's been on Tim Ferriss' podcast and has been on numerous scientific and popular programs. Now, this part is to make my lawyer happy. Do not do this on your own. Work with an experienced, and we'll probably talk about the word experienced, healthcare professional. Any products that we mentioned, I'm going to have a link to them below that we're going to talk about in the product. And so that's pretty much what we're going to have. You know, I watched Dom, for you listeners here, I watched Dom and Rhonda Patrick, she's another very smart person, discuss ketogenic diets a few weeks ago, or actually I watched them a few months ago and then again just recently. And they really got into the weeds. Sometimes when I was listening to them, it sounded like Klingon with the vocabulary that they were using. The two scientists talking at a very high level. So today, I want to break it down. We're going to break it down for the non-scientist, the person who has no knowledge of ketogenic diets or very little knowledge of ketogenic diets. I'm going to start off with a kind of a two-part question, Dom. I want to talk about what are ketogenic diets, what are ketones, and we're going to focus mostly on talking about fat metabolism, fat loss, and exogenous ketones later on in our discussion today. But I want to also give us an overview about what in what areas are ketones used to help people in various diseases and things like that.
Sure, good question. Before I begin, I just want to clarify my department. It's the Department of Molecular Pharmacology and Physiology.
Okay, I guess I was wrong on one of the
close.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I kind of bring that up because pharmacology is kind of what I'm supposed to be studying, but we found that nutrition is actually more powerful for what I was studying, which was seizures. And that set me on the path of looking at the ketogenic diet. And kind of answering your question, I like to begin talking about the ketogenic diet and exogenous ketones from the perspective or the context of fasting. And, you know, most people have gone without food for a period of time, and for many of them, it's uncomfortable. But I could tell you that after the second or third day, it gets considerably easier because your ketone levels begin to be elevated. Mm-hmm. So I'll take another step back. And talk about when you stop eating, you essentially start to liberate your body fat stores. You liberate fatty acids from your fat stores called adipose. And these fatty acids are actually the preferred fuel for your body. Your heart runs more efficiently off fatty acids than glucose, for example, and our body runs extremely efficient off fat. The problem, I guess you could call it a problem, is that the brain cannot transport these fatty acids across the blood-brain barrier. So what our bodies do, usually after 24 hours going into the second or third day, is that the fat burning process in the body is so accelerated if you stop eating for a couple of days, is that the fat burning process in the liver starts to create these ketone bodies, which could be thought of as water-soluble fat molecules. Mm. And if fat molecules range in size from like 8 carbons to like, 20 carbons. And think of your liver as like a wood chipper, and it chips them up into small little molecules that are now can cross membranes. And once these ketone bodies, which include something called acetoacetate or beta-hydroxybutyrate, once they get into the bloodstream, then they can essentially replace glucose as the primary fuel for brain energy metabolism. And there was work done years ago showing that when you burn ketones for energy, it's like burning a high-octane fuel. Like we come up to the gas pump and we have regular and we have high octane. Mm-hmm. So the ketones would be like the high-octane fuel, right? And so from an evolutionary context, if you're a male and, you're out there hunting 10,000 years ago, and in the absence of food, if you didn't have energy, if you didn't have your wits about you, if you weren't thinking lucid, then you couldn't, seek, track down, and run down the animal. So the people that did not thrive in a fasted state probably failed to kind of procreate and adapt to the environment and move on. So it's a hardwired kind of being in a state of ketosis is more or less a hardwired evolutionary adaptation. And it's due to, not only the food selection we had thousands of years ago, but food availability. Mm-hmm. So you could argue that being in a state of ketosis is actually a natural state to go in and out of ketosis from periods of time. Obviously, human population would stumble upon fruit trees and would gorge themselves, or kill an animal and would gorge themselves. So it's more like intermittent fasting, but on a survival stage, if you will. So it's not an unnatural state. Modern medicine considers being in ketosis an unnatural state because it's associated with type 1 diabetes. Mm-hmm. And that's called, diabetic ketoacidosis. But that's very different from what I'll be talking about, which is nutritional ketosis. Mm-hmm. So in a fasted state, it takes you about 2 to 3 days for your body to start producing these ketone bodies. And then your brain can shift from using glucose to using ketones as an energy source. Mm-hmm. And that can be beneficial in many ways, but it's very difficult to get to. Sure. So one way to mimic the fasting ketosis is to follow a ketogenic diet. So ketogenic diet is the classically, used ketogenic diet at Johns Hopkins is like 90% fat. Mm-hmm. And when you're eating it, it more or less mimics the metabolic physiology that you have in a fasted state. So it puts a lot of fats into your bloodstream, and your body thinks it's burning its own fat stores because there's an absence of carbohydrates. It essentially senses that you're not eating, and it starts to the accelerated fat burning process starts to make these ketone bodies. And even with a level of calories that you can maintain your weight, you can produce a state of nutritional ketosis. And this has been the standard of care for drug-resistant epilepsy since the 1920s and 1930s, until anti-epileptic drugs kind of hit the scene in the 60s and 70s. And then it had a resurgence in utility back in the mid-1990s with Hollywood producer Jim Abrams gave a story in Dateline NBC about his son Charlie. That his story was that they tried every anti-epileptic drug under the sun in combinations, and nothing worked until they used the ketogenic diet. But he was not told by his neurologist that the ketogenic diet was an option, and probably did a lot of damage along the way with all the drugs. And when he used it, it worked remarkably well, and the scientific literature supported this as being an underutilized, highly effective therapy. So he wanted to gain more publicity for it, and he started the Charlie Foundation. And Meryl Streep was his friend, a Hollywood producer, so he's rubbing elbows with different Hollywood celebrities. And Meryl Streep did a movie about the ketogenic diet, and it's called First Do No Harm. And I watched that movie back in 2008 or 9, and it really motivated me to study the ketogenic diet, to study fasting ketosis. And with my military contracts, I became interested in leveraging the power of ketones into a substance, into what we call exogenous ketones, so found outside the body, something that could be consumed in a shake, in a pill, that can elevate your blood ketone levels and start feeding your brain the superfuel. And I realized that those tremendous applications, I was actually surprised that nobody was studying this. I shouldn't say nobody. Actually, the NIH was studying this, and Oxford University was studying this. And I found this out throughout a series of patents that had been filed. And also, there was a number of grants that had been awarded by DARPA for what was called Warfighter Performance Enhancement.
What's DARPA?
And DARPA is it's a kind of a secret organization. It's a defense organization that does a lot of top secret things. You probably see them mostly in kind of the robotics industry. They've advanced that considerably. Drones, but they also dabble in physiological, biological, scientific development, tech transfer and development. So a lot of military-based applications, and I could say a lot of the stuff that the military is using kind of evolved from DARPA-related projects. Mm-hmm. So DARPA had been funding, and the Department of Defense had been funding some research. And that caught my attention, and I kind of pitched the idea to my program officer at the Office of Navy Research, because I was studying oxygen toxicity seizures, which occur in Navy SEAL divers that use a closed-circuit rebreather. Mm-hmm. It allows you to go scuba diving, but you don't have any bubbles, so there's a stealth component to it.
Sure.
And it allows you to evade your enemy, so you could sneak up on them in a quiet lake in the middle of nowhere. The disadvantage of that type of equipment is that if you dive down too deep, the high concentration of oxygen can give you a seizure. So, I was studying why these seizures occur and how to mitigate it, how to prevent them from happening. And all the data was pointing to preserving brain energy metabolism, because high oxygen can start to disrupt brain energy metabolism. It's a stimulant at high levels, and it can contribute to free radicals, what we call reactive oxygen species. And the ketones would essentially make the brain function so efficiently that it wouldn't be spitting out these free radicals, kind of like an engine running off really clean, high-octane fuel does not spit out as much carbon.
Sure.
It burns more clean. And essentially that's what's happening when your body and brain is running off ketones, is that the oxidation of the ketone molecule does not liberate or spit out, if you will, as much free radicals. So you have a cleaner burning kind of fuel. And I recognize this from a scientific theoretical point of view, but then the next step was to determine what types of ketone molecules we could develop, and also, which ones were most effective for the different types of applications that we were interested in applying them for. So now it started with oxygen toxicity seizures, but now we study about a dozen or more different applications for exogenous ketones, but it would also work. The ketogenic diet is one way to get yourself into ketosis, and you could do therapeutic fasting, the ketogenic diet, or ketone supplementation. Or you could do a combination of that.
Sure.
So you could do intermittent fasting, and then, which is basically not eating all day, and then eating within a 6-hour or so window, and then you eat your ketogenic diet food during that time, and then perhaps maybe some ketone supplements, and then maybe even have ketone supplements during the fasting state, because it would further enhance the fasting, the benefits of fasting. So these are some of the protocols that we're interested in sort of developing and applying to, managing cancer, to managing seizures, and also to warfighter performance. Because if you're a special ops guy out in the field, you don't have a lot of time to eat.
Sure.
You have limited food availability. So something that would make you more resilient to an absence of food and keep you cognitively and physically resilient are all things that the military is interested in. So these are things that we kind of are interested in studying, keeping that cognitive resilience under extreme environments of altitude, of hyperbaric environments.
Okay.
So that's a little snapshot of kind of what ketosis is and the ketogenic diet and exogenous ketones.
Yeah.
And now there's just so many different applications we're studying.
Sure. Well, that's actually very interesting stuff, and I think the military applications and the performance applications are really useful. Could you go into a little bit about how in the ketogenic diet, how fat is used as an energy source?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of the benefits of the ketogenic diet is that it really forces your body to liberate fat stores, to liberate the fatty acids, I should say, from fat stores. And in doing so, it essentially enhances your metabolism to burn more fat. And this has been shown experimentally in various studies that have been done. The one that comes to mind is Jeff Bolick's study at Ohio State University, kind of conducted at University of Connecticut. He's at Ohio State now. But he had elite level athletes that were adapted to a high carbohydrate sugar burning diet and that were performing at a very high level, and athletes that were performing at a similar level but had been following a low carb, high fat ketogenic diet. And if you look at O2 consumption and CO2 production, the respiratory quotient, you can determine what the body is using for fuel. And he was able to show very convincingly that if you're adapted to a ketogenic diet, that you're burning about at least 2 times the amount of fuel, of fat for energy. So the athletes have actually changed their metabolic physiology to use fat as an energy source. And that has tremendous advantages because in the context of an ultramarathon, if you have 2 guys, one carb adapted or sugar burning and one fat burning, and they start running, your sugar stores in the form of glycogen will run out after about 1,500 to 2,000 calories. Your
Sure.
stores in your muscle and your liver. But if you're pulling off your fat stores for energy, you're sparing your glycogen in the liver and the muscles because you're preferentially using the fatty acids for fuel. And, even a lean person has 20 to 30,000 calories of fat for energy stored on their body.
Wow.
Because fat is very, very energy dense. It's got 9 calories per gram. And, even if you pinch the skin on your forearm, which is very thin, it's still a lot of fat because it's encapsulating your whole body. And then, in your lower back, on your butt, on your thighs, you have lots of fat on your body, even in a lean person or a person that looks lean. So that's really, from a practical standpoint, that's pretty huge.
Yeah.
And that's, so being fat adapted has a tremendous advantage as far as substrate utilization, as far as extending your performance. And that has, implications for, the old guy, the guy that's trying to lose fat. If he restricts his carbohydrates, it's naturally forcing your body to burn more fat for energy. And with carbohydrate restriction and adding more fat to your diet, that has a satiating effect on your brain. So it's kind of telling your brain it's not as hungry because you don't have the blood glucose fluctuations. So there, you have kind of a practical, maybe perspective of the diet.
Yeah, I understand, and I don't know if this is accurate. I just heard this, that LeBron James went to South Africa to work with someone on getting on the ketogenic diet. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I know probably Tim Noakes maybe would be, and Tim Noakes is a doctor, a physiologist that advanced this idea of what's called the central governor theory, that in exercise performance, the fuel flow to your brain will dictate the extent of your performance and perceived exertion, reaction time, motor recruitment. So if your brain is getting lots of energy in the form of ketones, which will be high even if you're in a fasted state, and even if you've run out of your stored sugar stores, your body's burning fat, so you have a steady flow of energy to your brain in the form of ketones that would preserve your brain's energy. And that's extremely important for athletic performance because maintaining and preserving brain homeostasis maintains neurotransmitters. Like I mentioned, there's perception, your perceived exertion is less, your reaction time is faster, very important for a basketball, and your brain activates your muscles, right? So if your brain's functioning with a high energy fuel, it's sending signals to your muscles to contract, so you're faster, your reaction time's better. So these all can have tremendous implications for the athlete. And I think the one of the nutritionists is Kate Shanahan, and we had met a couple times, at least one time I think we were at the Ancestral Health Symposium and sat next to each other and had a nice chat. And she was working with a number of athletes and adapted them more away from a carbohydrate-based diet to a high-fat, low-carb diet that would put the athletes into ketosis, and they were performing better, and their body composition changes were impressive. So LeBron James has been kind of in the media a lot with his short option.
Yeah, exactly. You touched on this. I kind of want to go into this a little bit more. When you're on ketosis, what effect does it have on appetite and calorie intake for person in general?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because I think the effect of a ketogenic diet and ketones in particular on appetite contributes to what could be the main benefit of the diet, is that it suppresses your appetite. I think suppress is the wrong word. It controls your appetite, so your appetite's not controlling you, right? Okay. If you're on a high sugar diet, and I remember being on one, 10 years ago, and it doesn't have to be sugar. It could be like eating fish and rice. 2 or 3 hours later, I was getting hunger pangs. I was getting, cravings for bread, for carbohydrates, for a candy bar or something. When you're on a high-fat ketogenic diet, your blood glucose is very stable. Your insulin levels are very stable. And you don't have what's called the postprandial hypoglycemic dip. So after we eat, our insulin gets released, and from our pancreas, it's stimulated by the glucose that enters our bloodstream. And that insulin, and some people, what happens is that the insulin kind of disposes of a lot of glucose, and you get a hypoglycemic dip. Your blood sugar becomes low after you've eaten a lot of sugar, and that makes you crave sugar more. So you want to repeat that and do it over and over. It's a vicious cycle. And that's completely abolished or significantly attenuated if you're on a ketogenic diet. And you can look at people who wear a continuous blood monitor called the Dexcom. I have a student that's type 1 diabetic that has shifted from a carbohydrate-based diet to a ketogenic diet. And instead of his numbers going like this all day, his numbers do very little fluctuations all day, and his mind is sharper. It's much safer for him because he doesn't have very low lows or very high highs. And if your glucose is really high, that's essentially making your blood like sludge and impeding blood flow to your eyes. So if you're type 1 diabetic and your glucose is sky high, you could go blind. Sure. You could destroy your kidneys. So if you, I know it's a bit controversial, but if a type 1 diabetic was to go on a low-carb, high-fat diet, they would use considerably less insulin to manage. And whenever you're using less insulin to manage your type 1 diabetes, that's a good thing. So any doctor who says otherwise is not in his right mind. But doctors are not advocating the use of low-carb ketogenic diets for type 1 diabetes. They're starting to come a little bit on board, and there's even a book called The Ketogenic Diet for Type 1 Diabetes by a medical doctor who's a type 1 diabetic, but it's not embraced because people think eating this way is just so hard. but I don't find it hard personally. And most people who give it a chance won't find it very hard to do.
Yeah. I think, yeah, kind of that's, let's talk a little bit about the ketogenic diet, the modified ketogenic diet, and protein intake, since we're kind of on the subject of eating. So what's your views on that?
That's a good question. So it's really important to remember that the ketogenic diet is a medical therapy, and it was developed originally at the Mayo Clinic, implemented at Johns Hopkins, and I think there's about 150 to 200 different, centers in the United States that are linked with the Charlie Foundation, actually, that have dietitians that implement this. And it's supposed to be, you're supposed to weigh out your food, and it's very high in fat. In grams, you have, there's a 4-to-1, 3-to-1, 2-to-1. I don't want to get into discussing all the ratios, but essentially the clinical classic ketogenic diet is about 85 to 90% fat. And very low in protein, and people don't realize that. It's like 8 to 12% protein, and then the rest of it being, a very small amount of carbohydrates. So what has become popular over the years is the use of a modified ketogenic diet, or modified Atkins diet, it's also called. And that diet is about twice the amount of protein, which happens to be about equal to or less than the Western diet in protein. So it basically becomes an amount of protein that, is very comfortable and sufficient for an athlete. And it actually fits well into the diet from a practical standpoint if you're preparing meals. So a modified ketogenic diet is about 25% protein, I would say 20 to 30%, 25 with a little bit of wiggle room, and about 65% to 70% fat, with the balance, maybe 5 upwards to 10% being carbohydrates. And the carbohydrates would come primarily from green vegetables, leafy vegetables, cauliflower. I do a lot of cauliflower mashed potatoes.
Okay. Those are good.
It's actually a perfect ketogenic food. So, kale, spinach, asparagus, broccoli, cauliflower, all sorts of salads. Your fat can come from macadamia nut, is a perfect ketogenic food, avocado, olive oil, nuts. So these are all kind of foods that would be incorporated in high amounts in the modified ketogenic diet, whereas in a strict ketogenic diet, those foods that I mentioned would have to be limited. And from a modified ketogenic diet perspective, they're basically unlimited. And then you would fill in, your protein with fatty cuts of meat, chicken with the skin on it, a ribeye steak instead of like a lean steak, fatty cuts of pork, bacon, eggs.
I'm starting to get hungry as you're talking right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things because I've gotten on this just a little while ago, is using various sauces like hollandaise sauce, béarnaise sauce. I mean, that's egg yolks and butter, and it makes food taste great. I mean, it's actually kind of to eat on a modified Atkins diet.
I'm glad you bring that up. Yeah, because these sauces are things that we were, traditionally taught to avoid, right? The gravy and things like that, and they become like a perfect way to further boost the ketogenic diet, to get your macronutrient ratios into that profile that helps you better maintain ketosis. And there's companies out there making what's called fat bombs. So they'll make these little cookies or little, I don't know what you'd call them, like little chocolate desserts, like little chocolate balls actually. And they're made from butter and maybe coconut and stevia instead of sugar or erythritol. And you eat it, and it is basically like 90 or 95% fat, and it tastes like a dessert. Obviously it's very filling and satiating because it's mostly fat. And if you could, it allows you to get more protein into your meals. And if you have these fat bombs during the day, your overall macronutrient ratio would fit into the ratios needed to keep in nutritional ketosis. So, and they taste good too. So these are things like over the last decade, the ketogenic diet has evolved in ways that allow for compliance. And that's the big thing. Like, no one's going to follow a diet if it's difficult to do. So there needs to be So I think it opens up the window for many companies. I know Quest Nutrition launched what was called Quest Keto a few weeks ago. And if you go to the website, you could click on, not only do they have like a Reese's peanut butter cup and chocolate cups, but you can click on like a keto mousse or some kind of, beef stroganoff or salmon, and then they package it and send it right to your house.
Yeah.
So,
well, you
yeah.
have your own mousse that you've talked about.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your own mousse.
I like to source out my ingredients whole and kind of make things myself and experiment. There's different versions of it. Mm. So last night I had 2/3 of it was a coconut cream, and I buy Conchita brand coconut milk, and I pour off the coconut water and set that aside and use that for other things. And then I kind of take the cream and I put about 6 ounces into a bowl and maybe 1 or 2 tablespoons of sour cream in there too. So it's basically a bowl of fat, and then I'll add some dark chocolate to it, baking chocolate, and 1 scoop of a plant-based, I'm experimenting now with a plant-based protein source. It's a protein isolate that's Dutch chocolate. And then I put like a teaspoon of cinnamon, some stevia, and then about 1/4 of a cup of wild blueberries that have like only about almost half the sugar, so that I source out. And that whole thing has actually a perfect ketogenic ratio. So it fits that ketogenic ratio, and I can indulge on that every night. And it's like the last meal before I go to bed. So I see the ketogenic diet as something that's kind of indulgent, because I really enjoy fatty foods. And I think I feel most people that follow the ketogenic diet and are true to it will feel better, will have more energy, and will just have kind of more stable mood and well-being, once they've adapted to it. Sometimes it takes, for some people, athletes actually bounce in and out of ketosis because of long-duration athletic events. Or if they're a cyclist and they're on their bike for 6 or 8 hours, they can't even take up enough sugar, to stay out of ketosis. So they adapt very quick. Most athletes adapt very quick, but the elite level athletes that follow a ketogenic diet, for them to get back to baseline and then perform better, it takes them about 3 upwards to 6 months sometimes.
Oh, really?
Because
okay.
you're changing. Well, if you look at the numbers, I think Jeff Volek and Finney published something years back that showed it took 6 weeks. But from a practical standpoint, from the athletes that I've communicated with, it really takes a little bit longer. And it may be because, there's a learning curve to learning the ketogenic diet. So it may have taken them a couple months to be following, a diet that really keeps them into ketosis. And if they're into ketosis, if they look at their numbers, they usually have a dip the first month or 2, and then after about 3 months, they've come back to baseline, and then they start improving their numbers, and their stamina goes off the charts.
Wow.
So for elite level like performance athletes, so I get a lot of questions. Well, what about the strength athlete? What about the power lifter, the bodybuilder? I think ketogenic diets, modified ketogenic diets, are actually great for powerlifters and bodybuilders, especially if they're trying to lose weight or make a certain weight class. Mm-hmm. You can maintain your muscle and your strength going into trying to fit into a certain weight class. So I think they're extremely advantageous. We published an article with our Italian colleagues looking at elite level gymnasts, and their exercises were lots of dips and chin-ups and gymnastic type exercises, but they're able to increase or maintain their strength on a ketogenic diet, and they maintained all their strength and their muscle, but they lost more fat when they used the diet to do a body recomposition. We'll call it.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about exogenous ketones. Mm-hmm. And what is the benefit of using exogenous ketones? And my experience, I've been using exogenous ketones for about a month now. And the first thing I noticed was that I did not get a drop in energy in the afternoon, like at 2 or 3 o'clock, which was very common for me.
Yeah.
I slept a lot better. I had a lot more dreams. And also, I wasn't, my appetite, as you mentioned earlier, my appetite wasn't controlling me. I actually find myself not avoiding the calories, but not wanting the calories as much as I had in the past. So let's exogenous ketones. I think that's a really kind of interesting topic for everyone.
Yeah. I kind of prefer to run off a combination of endogenous and exogenous.
Okay.
But in being a fasted state, but only had taken ketones today, so I'm kind of running off exogenous ketones right now, and a little bit of my endogenous. What time is it? So I'm about 12 hours fasted or whatever, or more than that. So the benefits we're just finding out now. There's not a whole lot of research on this because they're actually new entities, new molecules. But what's important to recognize is that they are, when you consume them, they're bioidentical to what your body makes.
Okay.
So think of it as like creatine, right? So you take creatine, your body makes creatine, can derive it from its food sources, and can make it, but you're boosting it to kind of supraphysiological levels. And with exogenous ketones, you have the ability to adjust those levels to anywhere, and you have a commercially available meter that you can measure and look at your levels and find out where you feel the most energy, where your performance is optimized, and then you can drink your ketones or adjust your diet to get into that ideal, optimal zone. So that would be great. So what if a drug was like that? What if you could take a drug, anti-seizure drug or cancer drug or whatever, and be able to get a commercially available device and say you're in your optimal range? So I think that's pretty cool that this technology exists for exogenous ketones. So as far as applications, the original application for the first exogenous ketones that were out, well, there were some that were hypothesized or kind of suggested for a wide variety of metabolic disorders. But the main application for development and testing of exogenous ketones was warfighter performance. And that's how I stumbled upon it. So I would say athletic performance. There was a study that was published about a month and a half ago by Cox et al. In collaboration with NIH and Oxford that showed elite level cyclists had enhanced fat oxidation. They had lower levels of lactate production during exercise, and they had better time in their trials and cycling trials. So you have performance applications. The evidence suggested it was shifting body towards oxidizing fat for fuel, even though you were giving exogenous sources of energy, of ketones. And I think most importantly, the lower levels of lactate that was being produced, and it was about 50%, that's tremendous. So if an athlete can keep their lactate levels lower, they have less muscle burn, and you can extend athletic performance by suppressing that metabolite, which tends to impair muscle contraction. So it was lowering that. So that came out in Cell Metabolism, which is impact factor of a journal of like 17 or 18, which is pretty significant, and it was a pretty elegant study. And I knew that the work was being done over several years, so it's a lot of work. I actually wrote a review with my colleague Brandon Egan from Dublin, Ireland, that was published in the same journal just this week. It came out, and the title of that article is called "Fueling Performance: Ketones Enter the Mix." And it's a couple-page article, and it talks about that study, but it also talks about the effects on athletic performance may be due to the effects of ketones on the brain. So by enhancing your brain, if your brain's happy and energized, it can send signals to your muscle to contract faster with reaction times that are quicker. You get more motor units being contracted if your neurons are firing faster. Your perceived exertion is less because you're blocking some of the pathways. If your blood glucose is low, it's causing fatigue, and we call that central fatigue. And a lot of overtraining is really not necessarily the muscles, but your central nervous system's ability to contract the muscles. And this is more or less the central governor theory. And I think there's a lot of merit to that theory, and we want to test this experimentally with the use of ketones. And I think what's also important is to do what's called metabolomic studies. And we're doing this in animals where we feed ketones and we rapidly decapitate the animal at the end of the experiment, and we take the brain tissue and we look at all the different energy metabolites, and we show that the brain has essentially more neurotransmitters associated with sending signals to the muscle, and also greater levels of metabolites that are called the Krebs cycle metabolites. And this is kind of like the bioenergetic reserves of the brain, right? So the brain has these higher energy reserves, and it has more neurotransmitters, and that can be extrapolated to improve performance. So that would be like the first application, and the second application would be really what the ketogenic diet, the standard of care, what it's used for is epilepsy. And this, I'm really excited about this because this could change the whole, it could be a paradigm shift in treating seizure disorders and epilepsy. If the ketogenic diet has been underutilized because it's so hard to implement. You go to a doctor and he gives you a pill, and that's easy to do. And actually, patients have a hard time just taking a pill. So if you could develop some kind of shake that you drink that actually tastes good, you would be giving your body energy and controlling seizures and getting all sorts of health benefits. And we know that anti-seizure drugs have a host of side effects, including in kids, they cause developmental delays.
Sure.
So it can, ultimately decrease the IQ of the kids that are following it and have all sorts of developmental delays. So if we could mimic the ketogenic diet with ketone esters, I think that's kind of what I'm most excited about, is changing the world of epilepsy with this. And a lot of epileptologists will argue, well, the ketogenic diet works because it's restricting glucose, and it's not just the ketones. But a lot of the data that's emerging now is suggesting that the ketones themselves have anti-seizure effects. Ketones have anti-inflammatory effects, tremendous anti-inflammatory effects. And I think a lot of seizures that people are having, whether it be caused by febrile seizures are caused, or various viruses that cause neuroinflammation, like things like the herpes simplex virus. Before people get a cold sore outbreak, they'll get a headache, or shingles, and I have people that email me and they say, is the virus that I have in my body affecting my brain? Because I get these horrible headaches, and then a few days later I get shingles. And we know that these viruses cause neuroinflammation in the brain. And some people who have headaches, they'll have a seizure. Or some people have these various neuroinflammatory disorders. I guess a good example would be traumatic brain injury. It causes neuroinflammation. And if you've had a penetrating TBI, a penetrating traumatic brain injury, you're about 85 to 90% likely to have seizures. And those seizures, because you're disrupting brain energy metabolism, you are causing neuroinflammation that is undoubtedly contributing to the seizures. And the new data is showing you can actually use a PET scan technology and show that just preceding a seizure, people will have higher rates of neuroinflammation. And then when you have a seizure, you have greater levels of neuroinflammation, because seizures beget seizures, and it could be resulting in part due to this neuroinflammation, which the ketones could be targeting.
Okay.
Reducing.
There's a lot of stuff out there in terms of in the supplement world, and a lot of it is very poor quality. What ketones, exogenous ketones that are out there right now, do you find are good quality and produce the effect that they say they're going to produce? I've been taking Ketogenics, and actually, by the way, they have if you sign up for them, they have a great ketogenic menu that they send you every day.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I gotta send
Yeah, they send you like a recipe for 30 days every day, and it's actually, I mean, the food is really good.
I have their product here, so actually keep it by my desk. Yeah. So yeah, I have their product. Prove It makes a product too that I've tested and tried. So I think these companies have made big strides because I've been following them all along. Some of them use our kind of a formula that we developed, and sort of the University of South Florida has the license for it, but they have different licensees for the patent, and some of them incorporate a ketogenic formula that has been shown to be superior, with the combination of ketone salts and medium chain triglycerides, which was incorporated into the Ketogenics formula. So I think the ones that stand out, the three that stand out would be Ketogenics. Prove It has really done a great job with their product too. Forever Green, they have a product, Ketopia. So I've tested that. All of them tend to raise my ketone levels between 0.5 to 1, depending on a state. If I'm fasted, I feel like my body's using ketones at an accelerated rate. So sometimes they won't, elevate as fast. So it kind of depends, but so they're now at the point where all of them taste good, actually.
Okay.
These are they're pretty good. And this is ketone salt products. So a lot of our research, probably about 80 to 90% of it, has been the ketone ester. And it's extremely difficult to mask the flavor of a ketone ester. And gram for gram, it's on average about 2 to maybe 3 or 4 times more potent, depending on what ketone ester you're talking about. They have, the properties can make it difficult to administer because of tolerability, of palatability. But we're working, with different types of ketone esters for, the special operations community, also for medical purposes. But when it comes to commercially available products, I would say Ketogenics, like top of the list. Prove It, up there with them too. Forever Green makes the Ketopia product, I think, which is, I've tested them all, and they all give me about the same level of ketones. And then you have companies like Quest Nutrition that make a medium chain triglyceride oil powder, and that's I keep it also by my desk here, and I think it's also on Amazon. You can get it. And I add a scoop to that to my coffee, and I mean you can drink a cup of coffee and show a pretty significant elevation in ketones with 1 or 2 scoops in there. So that's a product that I like, a ketogenic product. But when it comes to exogenous ketones, I think the 3 companies, the Ketogenics, especially, is the one that I'm using right now, and it's a fantastic product. And I think these companies, I'm pushing them. I'm always pushing them. I was like, why don't let's you should reformulate it in a way to get this amount of ketones in it so you can reliably get levels to 1 to 2 millimolar. And they are always kind of in the process of reformulating and evolving. And I think they're probably going to have to evolve to deal with the competition out there, because I think there's going to be a lot of competition with people trying to get the best product. And I'm in the business of actually doing the blood work to show it actually works and what doesn't work. Sure. And the 3 products that I mentioned are kind of confirmed by us as ones that actually truly elevate ketones. And they happen to taste good too, so that's a benefit.
Is the amount of exogenous ketones you take dependent on your body mass?
Yeah, it's a good question. It definitely is. So a 120-pound female is going to not take the same as a 250-pound male.
Yeah, sure.
But interestingly, there are some people that, I've seen people that were over 200 pounds get a 1 millimolar boost in taking 1 packet of exogenous ketones. And I've seen my wife, for example, took the same packet, and her levels were like 0.5, 0.4 to 0.6, around there. And so it really depends. Not that, you know, the blood levels of ketones is the end-all be-all, because, you know, it could be that my wife just uses ketones more efficiently. So the tissues are sucking them up and using them for energy or transporting them to the brain. But I think it's, we call this the pharmacokinetic studies, and which is, you know, you consume the ketones and then you measure the blood at, you know, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3, and it's a tedious thing to do, and you do it multiple times, you know, over multiple days, but it gives you that pharmacokinetic profile will tell you how potent that product is. And we do a lot of pharmacokinetic studies in mice and rats, and now we're doing it in humans. And I've seen that it varies, but on average, yeah. So you would want to, the packets that are out there now are about 40 grams per packet, 30 to 40 grams per packet, and one packet is good for, you know, anyone weighing between 150 to like 200 pounds, I would say. I was on a daily routine of taking 1.5 packets per day for a long time. So I was doing an intermittent fasting where I wouldn't eat all day, but in the middle of the day, I would mix 1.5 packets together, and I would drink that over a period of about 1.5 to 2 hours. Okay. And that would be like my window of like getting stuff done time. You know, right about, I would get all my kind of emails and teaching out of the way, and then from like 2 to 6, you know, I would just be writing or working on grants or just working on like high intensity, mental intensity things, and I would get the most work done during that time. But I would sip on it kind of gradually over an hour. If I downed it all in one shot, some of the issues, the mineral load that you get from some of these ketone products, they could have sodium, potassium, magnesium in there. As you know, like milk of magnesia is a laxative, and too much minerals. So I would drink a little bit, let it sit on my desk, and then maybe a half hour later, take another sip, and then the mineral load isn't as much. And I find that the buzz that I get is pretty good. Okay. These products have a little bit of caffeine. I know the Exogenous has green tea extract, which may give you, 50, 60 milligrams of caffeine, but it's like a nice little buzz. So. Okay.
So you were talking about the level of blood levels of ketones. From a practical standpoint, an individual like me or our listeners, how do they know they're in ketosis? How do they measure it? And what level do they want to be at to basically get the optimal effect of the exogenous ketones? Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it may vary. So if we go to the extreme, to the epilepsy patient or the the person who has a metabolic disorder, it could be as high as 3 to 4 millimolar. But for the normal person that's just using it to enhance their energy levels or cognitive state, their physical kind of well-being, I would say anywhere between 0.5 to like 2 millimolar would be kind of the ideal level to be at blood levels. And not everybody has sort of the means or the interest to measure their blood levels. So you could also use a urine ketone strip, and maybe, I don't know if I have some around here. Yeah, I think I do. These are the multi-sticks, here that measure like 10 different things, but on one of these things is ketone levels. And that would be it actually measuring acetoacetate. And you have conversion of beta-hydroxybutyrate to acetoacetate. Mm-hmm. And you can go to a CVS or Walgreens, any pharmacy, and buy what's called keto sticks. And usually CVS has their own brand. And it only comes out to 25 cents a strip. Mm-hmm. And by measuring that, if you're, out of trace into the moderate levels, so I would say from the keto stick, anywhere between 15 to 40 milligrams per deciliter, that if your ketones are elevated to that extent, or even a little bit higher if you're exercising, you're getting the benefits of ketones, which essentially means that your blood levels are high enough that the metabolites are high enough that it's having a physiological effect. It's giving your brain more energy. It's having, anti-inflammatory effects that I talked about, perhaps even effects on gene expression, which have been studied in various labs. So you're getting the benefits of ketones if you're registering on what's called the P strips, the ketone strips.
Yep.
The blood is kind of like the gold standard that we have now, and if you're measuring 0.5 to 1, you're getting benefits. And for athletes, the optimal level may be as high as like 3 millimolar, so 1 to 3 millimolar. And the athletes that I talk to do a combination of a modified ketogenic diet or modified Atkins, and then they'll supplement prior to or intra-workout. Okay. So they're doing kind of a hybrid approach to their own endogenous ketone production, and then further augmenting their performance with exogenous ketones.
Okay. What kind of there's a few ketone meters out there that measure blood levels. What do you find is the best for everyday use for someone like myself? Or
yeah, I would recommend the Abbott Labs Precision Extra is pretty good. And then they have the Abbott Labs makes a it's called Precision Neo device. So it's a little bit smaller profile device. And Novamax, let me see, I have a couple in my lab. The Novamax makes a ketone meter that 5 years ago it didn't work very well, but I think they've improved the technology over time. So I guess Precision Extra would be the one that's most widely available. The Neo is pretty good, and that's kind of the one that I use right now. I've been using it. It's slightly more accurate, might be a little bit more expensive, but it's a little slightly more accurate when it's measuring, especially when it's measuring glucose. So keep in mind that most of these meters, when we tested them against laboratory equipment that measures ketones and measures glucose, the meters actually measure with exogenous ketones are underrepresenting the ketone number. So if you're measuring 0.5, it's actually a little bit higher. And if your glucose is 100, it's actually a little bit lower than what it's really recorded. Okay. I don't know why the glucose would be low, but the ketones may be reflecting a lower concentration because you have what's called a racemic mixture in the ketone products on the market now. And it's not fully measuring all the ketones that are actually in the product. The meter isn't. But some of it gets interconverted over to the other form. There's like a mirror image of the two ketone molecules. You have the D and the L, and some of the L gets converted over to the D, and the D is measured on the meter. So I don't want to confuse too many people, but the important thing is that if you are measuring 0.5, you're actually doing pretty good. That means like your ketones are actually higher than that, than they reflect. So there are, I know there's companies like Prove It and Ketogenics are probably going to formulate their products that have just completely the D form of the ketone body. So it may be more accurate in reading on the meter. But keep in mind, you get about a 25% underrepresentation of the true ketone value with the current exogenous ketones on the market. And if you also measure blood glucose, which is an important biomarker to keep track of, these meters consistently measure about 10 to 15% higher than they actually are according to measurement with laboratory equipment. So a lot of people freak out if their blood glucose is running like 90 or 110. That's actually okay on the meter. So that's pretty good. Like a fasting blood glucose of 100 or higher, you'd probably want to bring that down if you could, but it's not an alarming high in any way. in different states. And I remember, I consistently, we've had type 2 diabetics, and sometimes they'd be 300 or 400 milligrams per deciliter, their blood level. So that's high. But when, you're talking the average person does not need to get sort of upset if their blood glucose is 100, because the meter is likely overrepresenting it. For reasons I don't completely understand. I should use a variety of different meters, but the Precision Extra seems to run a little bit high. And then the Novamax is also another meter that has improved over the years. I think it's a little bit cheaper too. I think the strips are a little bit cheaper. So that's another meter that's pretty good.
Okay. Dom, what's the, there's a little difference in terms of men using exogenous ketones and women. Could you go into that a little bit about the difference?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I guess it still remains to be studied with exogenous ketones, especially. I don't think, besides our lab, I don't think anyone else has looked at the effect of exogenous ketones on females. So, those studies still need to be done. If we talk about the state of nutritional ketosis in males versus females, I have found anecdotally, through feedback that I get from males and females, and also from our experimental animals, that so females are more variable in many different ways. So female,
that's true.
Well, it's true, because you do have the estrous cycle, and that could impact your physiology, your psychology sometimes if your hormones are fluctuating. So I think this needs to be appreciated, and that females are more or less unique and special metabolic entities that need to be considered, because the effect of hormones can have different effects on metabolism. And it's interesting. I've gotten quite a few emails from people when they you get into the menstrual cycle. Some of them actually produce more ketones, but more often than not is that it tends to kick your body out of ketosis, which would make me think that higher levels of insulin may be being produced. Maybe they become a little bit insulin resistant. Maybe their liver is making more glucose. That we call that gluconeogenesis. They're converting more food to glucose, which appears to be happening in most of the women. And now, how will that influence exogenous ketone supplementation? I would sort of argue, or I would suggest that exogenous ketones may actually have a more of a positive effect during the menstrual cycle, because if you are a little bit insulin resistant, that we know that ketones can enhance insulin sensitivity, and ketones, have a mood stabilizing effect. And we recently, we ran some experiments to show that it reduces anxiety, it helps to stabilize the mood, it helps dampen, significantly attenuate the fear response or stress response. So, and these are all things that kind of can play into, we know postmenstrual or premenstrual syndrome or other sort of psychological effects that could be associated with hormone fluctuations. Maybe ketones could stabilize that. And that's really how it's working on the brain in regards to controlling epilepsy, is that the leaders in the field feel that the ketogenic diet is preserving brain homeostasis. So they use the word homeostasis a lot. And it helps bring a dysregulated brain back into normal homeostasis. And I think maybe ketones for females could be used for that purpose. And I think also females tend to have a lot of a raging appetite sometimes during their menstrual cycle. So I think the dose that females are using may need to be adjusted depending upon their cycle. And that would really be the only variable. Other than that, I did find a few emails of women that took the product and just blew up, and they felt like they're holding water. So, normally, we're excreting lots of sodium, and for reasons maybe I don't fully understand, the high sodium content in some of the products, I think the Prove It product's pretty high in sodium, relatively, and I'm a big fan of sodium because I think it helps my workouts. You know, it helps temporarily increase your blood volume, so you get like a better pump and kind of more fluid reserves. But in females, especially if maybe they're menstruating or their insulin's high, they'll tend to retain more sodium in their bodies, and they get that puffy effect. But I would kind of argue that this is more or less a transient effect, but it's a very real effect because some of them, you know, show me their scale numbers, and it could go up, you know, 5 to 7 pounds in the first couple days that they start using, you know, 2 or 3 packets of the product per day. But typically after a week or two, they start shedding the water, and it's like their body is readjusting to excreting more sodium, and then they balance out, and then it's like, wow, their bodies tighten up again. So I've gotten a number of emails, enough feedback to make me realize it's a real phenomenon, that about 20 or 30% of them tend to get a little bit puffy when they start the product because maybe they're retaining some of the sodium that's in the product. The sodium is bound to beta-hydroxybutyrate, and that's one of the salts. The Ketogenics products, I think, has sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium together, whereas the Prove It product is mostly the sodium, beta-hydroxybutyrate.
Okay.
And calcium, too. It has some calcium.
Yeah. Is there, on the exogenous ketones, is there a toxic level, and is there a, do you recommend cycling on and off them, or what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I get that a lot. Like, should we be in ketosis all the time? And I don't think so. I think it makes sense that from an evolutionary perspective, if we look at our food availability, if we look at the types of food that we were eating years ago, that it's a natural state of man to be in ketosis, in and out of ketosis during times. So maintaining it all the time, which is what I do actually, it may not be optimal, but I know I feel better. And if you feel good and my blood work looks really good, I see no reason of getting off of it. But, you know, I don't like to kind of tell people what to do. And I also think of kind of what we're doing is breaking new ground. Like no one, except for people, you know, and I do talk to people managing disorders like metabolic disorders or epilepsy, and they've been in a state of ketosis for decades, literally decades, and their blood work looks fantastic. So I would argue that it's probably not hurting them in any way. But I also tell people to, you know, if you got blood work every year or so, I would say get it 2 or 3 times a year instead of once a year or once every couple years. You know, I talk to people that like never gotten blood work in their life. So I think it's really good to get a comprehensive metabolic panel, at least once a year, ideally 2 to 3 times a year, especially when you're making such a dramatic shift in your diet, because it's really changing the way your body's working. And you want to look at kidney function. You want to look at your liver enzymes. You want to look at your markers for kidney function, like your creatinine levels. And you want to look at things like, I like to look at hormones too. And even things like IGF-1. And what I found, insulin-like growth factor can contribute to things like cancer, or perhaps could stimulate the growth of cancer if you have cancer. And I did find that my insulin levels, instead of being like 3 or 4, are now down to like 1 or 2, and my IGF-1 levels are at the low range of normal, which I think is probably pretty good going into, you know, now that I'm in my 40s, kind of getting, as we get older, I think it's good to keep insulin low. That keeps insulin sensitivity high. And as we age, we become more carbohydrate intolerant, meaning our bodies just simply don't use sugar and carbohydrates like it did when we were 19. And I grew up in an Italian family eating massive amounts of pasta and bread and everything. And if I did that now, you know, I don't know what would happen. But as we age, I think it's ideal to shift our bodies into eating more low carb and even being more ketogenic. So, you know, for, 17, 18-year-old kid to be taking exogenous ketones or being on a ketogenic diet all the time, I don't think that's ideal. I think maybe the spikes in insulin help with the growth. in many ways, and your body is just so insulin sensitive when it's younger. So I think, more protracted, sustainment of nutritional ketosis is better if we're older. So I would say not so much for the younger population, but I think continuous use for the older population is okay and maybe ideal.
Okay. So I kind of like to put it all together here in terms of maybe giving someone a regimen, i.e. maybe me. So I lift 3 times a week, do cardio 3 times a week. Want to lose some body fat. I've always had an issue with body fat. I mean, I was always a fat kid in grade school. And how do we, I have coffee in the morning. I mix it with MCT, actually a couple of scoops of that, put some creatine, some coconut oil, magnesium. And when do I take the ketogenic product or any kind of exogenous ketone in relationship to the workout? And then when is the best time to actually measure your ketone levels after you take the exogenous products?
So it sounds like you're doing kind of everything that I would be doing at your age or should be doing now. I do kind of just eat 2 meals nowadays. Sometimes I fast, like today if I have to wake up early. But as far as when to take the ketone supplement, I've had quite a few emails from older people. I was actually just talking with Mary Newport. You may know her. She wrote, she kind of advanced this whole idea of ketones for Alzheimer's disease. So, and wrote the book, What If There Was a Cure? And it's a book about ketones and ketone esters. So what I find is that, following a regimen like you're following with the butter coffee or bulletproof coffee, whatever you want to call it, in the morning, and then, and then drinking that. And once you get hungry, then it's time, then you can take your ketone supplement. And you'll probably experience the benefits of ketones as far as energy, appetite suppression, and kind of ride that for a couple hours, which I tend to do, and try to kind of condense my work into that time. And then eat late afternoon or in the evening for a couple hours, and that would be intermittent fasting. But in regard to consuming the ketones during exercise, I would do it kind of before and maybe even intra-workout. I think some of the benefits of ketones could be experienced, could enhance recovery. And as far as measuring ketone levels, we find that with the Ketogenics products and the other products out there, that they peak between, depending on what's in your stomach, and whatever you're taking it with, if it's fasted or with a meal, anywhere between 30 to 90 minutes. So we'll call it 1 hour. Okay. So consumption of it usually peaks within about an hour. I find in me, if I'm fasted at about 45 minutes, I hit that just about 1 millimolar. And after 45, it starts to come down a little bit, depending on what I eat. But I would say about 1 hour, you're kind of in strong ketosis. The products that incorporate medium-chain triglycerides, so it has the salts, medium-chain triglycerides, that's extended out a little bit farther. And that would include the products that I mentioned, the companies. The
Quest MCT.
Yeah, and the Quest MCT, yep.
Yeah. Any pre or intra workout supplements that you find have been helpful to you?
Yeah, I think branched chain amino acids are something that I've used in the past. I haven't been using them now. Company just sent me some Cybation is the brand that I use. They make a product called Extend, and I really like that product. And you can get the product that's sweetened or unsweetened called the raw form, and I buy that product. So I think branched chain amino acids have some merit behind it. We know leucine, there's a ton of research on leucine as a stimulator of muscle protein synthesis. And if you're in a fasted state or a calorie deprived state, if you're doing, a reduced calorie diet to lose weight, to lose fat, I think the leucine may help you preserve and enhance muscle. It also, branched chain amino acids have an effect on your exercise performance, so perceived exertion. So what they do is kind of block the neurotransmitter serotonin at the level of blood-brain barrier, and it's kind of serotonin can make your performance, can make you feel tired, can make your performance tank. So it kind of blocks that if you take branched chain amino acids intra-workout or before your workout. And caffeine. I would have to say caffeine is one of the best pre-workouts out there in moderation. You take too much caffeine, it can have a negative effect. So, you know, in practice, it usually amounts out to, from a neurological effect as far as feeling it, about 100 milligrams. But if you look at the physiological studies, you know, you put someone on a treadmill and run them to exhaustion, it usually takes about 400 to 600 or 500 milligrams of caffeine to get these measurable effects. But I just feel too wired with that. So I think being in a state of ketosis makes your body more sensitive to things, more sensitive to caffeine. So maybe you could probably take less of it. Other than that, you know, I'm not a real big supplement guy. I take vitamin D3. I take a little bit of melatonin before I sleep. Other than that, at B12, I have a sublingual B12 that I take. But other than that, I don't take any.
Any protein supplements that you like, or?
Yeah, I'm testing different vegan-based protein supplements. So I do have a little bit of a dairy allergy, dairy protein. So if I drink a glass of milk or have a big, you know, whey protein shake, it just doesn't sit right. It doesn't agree with me. So the vegan protein isolate supplements, protein powders over the years have evolved. Over the last 5 to 6 years, they were horrible like 5 years ago, but now they actually taste pretty good. The one that I use, I think, is MRM Dutch chocolate protein powder, and it's a combination of hemp. It has rice and pea protein, and it's a combination of the blend, and then it has like stevia and Dutch cocoa, and it's not prepared or processed with, you know, various things like hexane. And there's 2 or 3 products that I bought, but that's one of them. So I'm experimenting with some of these vegan protein isolates, because I would like to develop a ketogenic eating strategy for vegetarian, which is easy because they could eat, you know, eggs and dairy products. But I'd like to develop a vegan ketogenic diet regimen, because there's some people out there that, you know, whether they have cancer or epilepsy, or they're just trying to lose weight or get the benefits of the ketogenic diet, they are vegan. And I'm not a vegan, but I have friends that are. And I'd like to be able to develop a protocol that would allow them to have a food selection and even, you know, shake recipes that they could use. And these vegan protein supplements have evolved to the point where they're like very low in carbohydrates, similar to whey protein, and would allow them, a vegan, to get their protein needs supplied. So right now I'm not using, the only supplement that I'm using is just experimenting with these vegan protein powders, and they're pretty good.
Okay. There's some, in one of your interviews, you talked about some ketogenic desserts that are out there. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the one that I make actually would be yeah.
Okay. I thought there were some commercially available out there.
Oh, yeah. So Quest, if you go to questketo.com, they have a variety of, let me see, I had a whole bunch in my office right here I could show you. Actually, I gave a lecture to the medical students, the first and second year medical students, and I brought the box. I was like, they won't even eat half of it, and they quickly consumed all of them. So part of my mission is to connect with the future doctors, the medical students, and lecture to them about the benefits of the ketogenic diet. So within that box, there was the ketogenic, more or less the Reese's peanut butter cup, and they have the cups that have mint inside or that have just a chocolate cream inside. There's Italian crackers, there's chocolate mousse. I think you'll find all these on the questketo.com website.
Okay.
And over the years, it has been fun and working with that company, because they send us all the prototype products, And I mean, it's literally been years we've been testing these things, but it took them, they move very fast on many fronts, but they had to do a lot of, packaging studies and safety studies and shelf life. They have to make sure that they can stick the peanut butter cup at 40 degrees Celsius for like a year and make sure the nutritional value is the same after. So they had to do all these things before they hit the market, and they just hit the market literally like this month. So questketo.com, if you go there, you could buy like a la carte and just kind of click on the meals that you want or click on the desserts or the snacks, and then it's just sent to you, and you could be on, a monthly plan where they send you the same thing every month. But we've had, I guess one of the benefits of being into ketogenic diet research is that companies that are trying to get into this space be like, well, I'm developing these foods. Can I send it to you to try? And I'm like, sure. So what I do is I do the blood work that goes along with it to make sure. And I would say most of the companies that send me things, about 80% of them, I was like, no, this is not ketogenic. It might be low carb, but it's not really, sustaining ketogenic. But I deal with a lot of different companies, and I like to highlight or talk about the ones that have really evolved to the point where they're truly ketogenic, like Quest Nutrition.
Okay. All right. So, what's on the horizon? What do you see coming up here in the next few years, or over time here?
Mm-hmm. Well, next week, as early as next week, I'm heading off to Banff. There's the Ketogenic Diet Symposium, which is about 600 plus medical doctors, scientists, the Charlie Foundation. Meryl Streep has been to these events and talks. And it's doctors that study cancer, Alzheimer's disease, ALS, autism, epilepsy, of course, all presenting their data. So, and my lab is going there, and they have poster presentations and platform presentations. So that happens once every 2 years. So we're very excited about that. We're presenting there next week in beautiful Banff. So over the next 2 or 3 years, what I hope will happen is that the development and testing of ketone esters will be such that they are in a palatable form that we can get them to the mass market. So that's as I mentioned, they don't taste very good right now. That's one of the major hurdles, but also the safety studies. So we're doing a lot of safety studies now to get them FDA approved. And the FDA has a branch to become a safe food product. It needs to be generally recognized as safe or GRAS, and you have to do lots of safety studies before that happens. If it's a new entity, a new molecule to hit the market, and the salts are kind of in a gray area where you have beta hydroxybutyrate in food. Basically, if you're eating meat from an animal that's ketogenic, there's beta hydroxybutyrate in it, and the salts are found naturally anyway. But ketone esters are a little different because they're not technically found in nature. So over the next year or so, we're doing a lot of safety studies so we meet that FDA regulation hurdle, and also exploring the different applications of ketones, which would be the anti-anxiety effects, maybe the effects on anaerobic performance, like sprinting is something that we're interested in studying, and studying a variety, up to a dozen different types of ketogenic formulas. So various types of ketone salts and various types of ketone esters, and finding the ones that actually are most potent and which the ones that may work better for this disorder or that disorder. So, and that's a pretty tedious task, because first you develop and formulate the agent, and then you do the pharmacokinetics to say, yeah, it elevates ketones, and then you take that particular formula and apply it to an animal performance study or disease model, and then you take it to humans and do the same thing, for performance and whatever. So that encompasses a lot of what we'll be doing in the next couple of years.
Okay, great. Well, Dom, we are kind of coming to the end of partially to the end of my agenda here. Mm-hmm. And so I want to thank you. Lots of actionable items for our listeners here. Lots of things that are very practical that people can put to use immediately as soon as they get that order from Amazon the next day with their Prime account. So a couple of things. The old guy kind of does things a little differently. Tim Ferriss has his rapid fire questions that he asks again. The old guy, if you've been to our website, we're about virtues and vices. So sometimes I like to find out a little bit about my guests' vices. So what kind of So what kind of music do you like to listen to?
Music. Wow, yeah, music, is really, I talk about this with my wife a lot. Music can completely change your state. So it depends on what state I want to be in, right? So yesterday, I jumped. One thing that's therapeutic for me is to jump on my motorcycle, listen to music, and go to the gym. So it's a combination of like weights, like motorcycles, which I'm really into, and like heavy metal music, whether it be like old school AC/DC or Metallica or Guns N' Roses or Disturbed.
That's great. That's great workout music.
Yeah. So it's like, I get fired up, I get on my bike, I just have a short ride to the gym, and it's just music, and the things that I like to do. And, and that's for when I want to be amped up and want to get a high. But if I'm just relaxing with my wife, she's like Latin music, like salsa. If we're just chilling out, I listen to like even some Christian rock, and I listen to classical music when I'm driving sometimes, or I keep it in the background if I'm working on a grant. I like listening to classical music. So it depends on what kind of state I'm in.
Okay, all right. So when you are cheating and eating something unhealthy, what is it?
Yeah, so over the last couple years, when I go to the movies, I like popcorn. I get, occasionally, maybe a couple times a year, we'll get a big popcorn, and I'll have that. If I'm traveling abroad, and if I'm in Naples, I'm going to get pizza. If I'm in Switzerland, I'm going to try some chocolate. So it depends, but probably dark chocolate, sushi, if you call that a cheap food. I'll eat the rice sometimes, and popcorn, and occasionally like things like pizza. But it depends. We traveled all through Southeast Asia, and I ate some food. I don't even know what I ate. Some of it, it was some strange stuff, but I know it wasn't ketogenic, and of course I feel fine, actually. Sometimes I get a little buzz and a high if I eat some sugar, but I do some of the consequences of eating sugar or high carbohydrate foods is, especially if I eat it at night, I wake up a few hours early because I'm so hungry. So it spikes my insulin, and I wake up like out of ketosis, and I wake up kind of hungry. So yeah, kind of like a long answer to your question, but
that's good. Now, do you have a trash TV show that you watch?
We don't even have cable in my house. Yeah. And for a while, we didn't even have a TV. But trash TV show. Oh, you know what I have been watching actually is the A-Team.
Oh my God.
You know what?
I'm old school.
The A-Team and Miami Vice, and I think Knight Rider. Like these shows that I grew up watching, I'm a little bit nostalgic about them, especially the A-Team. And it just happens to come on this obscure channel that I have on a non-cable network. I have like a little antenna. I'm picking up some kind of signal from somewhere. And I like to watch something that is completely stupid, and it just gets my mind off of work, and I relax with my wife, and we just watch it. Also, I guess that would be the trashy channel. Yeah, but sometimes we'll watch a little bit of travel channel. So that's really the only, and that's not trashy, but yeah, I've been watching the A-Team the last couple of weeks.
All right. Do you drink alcohol?
Yeah, I do. I brought the last bottle home. Actually, there's a company called Dry Farm Wines.
Okay.
that makes, I would call it ketogenic wine. And
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, look them up. Look them up. They're called Dry Farms Wine, and I saw it at a recent convention or workshop, and I was like, "What is this?" I was like, "You know what? If it really is ketogenic, send me some, and I'll do the blood work." So I drank. They probably have about 20 different wines out, and I think what they did is basically pick wines that were very high quality, but had very little sugar, like 1 or 2 grams per large glass. And when you consume them, my blood glucose is completely stable or goes down a little bit, and my ketones don't budge at all. Or maybe they might shoot up a tiny bit, just because of the mild hypoglycemic effect. But essentially, you can drink these wines and stay in nutritional ketosis, and it has no effect. Whereas if I have like a rosé or some kind of sugary wine or beer, it does kick me out of ketosis. Even like a Michelob Ultra will, if I have 2 of them, and that's really my limit, it can kick me out of ketosis. But Dry Farm wines are fantastic. And I get this question a lot. Can I drink wine? People get stressed out. Can I drink wine on a ketogenic diet? And I was like, yeah, but you really got to do your research and find out which ones, have low sugar and test them out. But now all the testing's kind of been done for you, because you could just go to Dry Farm Wines. And I think they're reasonably priced. He's been sending me wine, so I haven't been purchasing it. But I think they're they're good wines, high quality wines at a really good price. And they taste great, and you can maintain ketosis while you're drinking them. And I don't drink more. Actually, yesterday I had 2 glasses, and that's a lot for me. But I typically drink 1 small glass, about 4 ounces, 3 to 4 ounces per day. And last night I had a little more than that. But yeah, that's my typical.
That does happen.
Yeah.
So, being in South Florida, do you smoke cigars?
No, I don't. I know Ybor City is like the cigar capital of the world. I'm not a big smoker at all, but when I do walk down Ybor City and get a whiff of it, I was like, wow, that actually smells pretty good. But I'm being in the medical field and teaching medical students, I kind of have to advise against any kind of smoking culture. But I will say that the smell of the cigars down in Ybor City, if I'm walking by it does smell kind of good. So it's like something I could get into if I wanted, kind of studying the thing that I'm doing. But I have several friends that are, good athletes, and they, go down there and have a cigar every once in a while, and I'm sure it doesn't hurt them.
It's a great way to have a great conversation with someone. It takes about an hour to smoke a cigar, and I find it very therapeutic in terms of relaxing and having a nice visit with a friend. So, all right. So, Dom, thank you. I'm very grateful for you taking the time. We went well over what I thought we would in terms of time, but so much actionable information and so much great stuff. And this it's just great, and I think everyone could get a lot of value by listening to this, and probably listening to it a second time. So this is Oris the Old Guy from www.oldguytalks signing off. Until later.
Opt in and encourage other old guy assholes like you to opt in also.